Are you ready for some?
All right.
Are you ready for some Tinderbox? It's Tinderbox meetup Sunday, the 12th of February. I'm Mark Bernstein, the developer of Tinderbox, and here is Michael Becker.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Super Bowl Sunday Tinderbox. Exciting day. Just out of curiosity, who's rooting for who, or who doesn't care at all?
No, I don't really care at all, but I'm rooting for the Chiefs since they're the underdog.
Yeah, it will be fun. It will be fun nonetheless. Go and hopefully have either have a party to go to, or can go somewhere where you want to go with nobody around because everyone else is at the party. So with that in mind, let's kick off today. Typical Tinderbox format is new people introduce themselves. Again, anybody that happens to be watching this video for the first time, the more the merrier. Everyone's welcome. You don't have to have any experience with anything we're talking about. You can just join up and engage and interact with us. Typically, new people introduce themselves, tell us what their interests are in the general concept of knowledge management, any ideas on how and why they're using Tinderbox, or pretty much anything else they want to talk about, because this tends to be a fairly eclectic group. With that in mind, why don't we? And then what we do is we either address people's specific questions or challenges. And then if we have a particular theme for the week, we dig into that, which today we do. We're actually going to look into some table development within Tinderbox. With that in mind, we don't see any new people per se. So projects, who's working on what and who has a question? Anything exciting?
I'm actually working on something I'd like to mention very briefly. I think it'll be a meetup topic in a few weeks, but I've been thinking about how we could package little bits of functionality in a way that you could more easily install them in Tinderbox. In particular, how while we can have things like subroutine libraries that you could install and use with only a very rudimentary notion of the action language. In particular, if you just know how to write assignment statements, functions are still going to be a challenge for you. And I'm imagining, for example, we talked about getting weather from an API at some point, or from your home observatory. It would be really great if you could just ideally copy a note that into your document that does everything you need, so that you could ask for the weather report and it would give you today's weather forecast and put it in a string, which you could then put wherever you want. I'm guessing that there are people here, I'm particularly looking at you, Chuck, who have thought about this. And so if you have solutions to this, I'd rather not reinvent the wheel. If you have thoughts for other things that I should or shouldn't think about, automatically download updates to the code base. We already have the plumbing to do that. Is that actually a good or a bad support strategy? So send me email.
On that same token, I mean, I love the idea of the functionality API. Another one I'm interested in is when I copy over a template, for example, from one note to another, invariably I will miss an attribute that template's looking for. And when I bring over a prototype from one note to another, that prototype might have attributes on it that are not yet created in the new document. And so sometimes that's hard to see, especially when if the attributes in the displayed attributes, you can see it and just create it. But if that attribute happens to be somewhere within that note's particular action code, rule, or an edict, or a template, you don't see it, and so therefore you got to kind of find it. So it would be really interesting to see strategies around handling and doing that. And I have played with that, where at one point I developed a script that would grow through and look at all of basically create an attribute index for each template, saying this template is using these attributes and these attributes exist in the file, these don't. And then I had a script at one point that would then create the attributes that didn't exist in that template. That worked, but it was a little fragile.
Yeah.
So
And avoiding the experience of that script, right, which did turn out to be a little fragile, I think dictates both limits on the way you use this library. I think it depends a lot on functions and local variables to avoid having to define many attributes.
Yeah.
And I think we now have functionality for creating notes and attributes that we can use inside functions without frightening the user too much and without causing havoc.
Okay. Yeah, that would be fun. Looking forward to that. All right. Who else? So we have Mr. Eddie, who wants to move away from Evernote and into DevonThink.
And think DevonThink as a staging area, a general junk, loose thinking before going to the good stuff, before promoting the good stuff to Tinderbox.
Okay, I'm just curious. I mean, how are you distinguishing good stuff versus bad stuff, and why DevonThink? I mean, why don't you just pull all the crap into Tinderbox, let it sort itself out as good versus bad? If it's purely text, and if it's PDFs and all of that, then obviously you want that in DevonThink. But if it's text,
there is some collection of PDFs, images that I want to have access to. I mean, it's just the way I just think in terms of development, acceptance, production. Eventually, I assume I will get to Tinderbox's production, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff I need to learn.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting. I was actually developing some Kanban work with Tinderbox the other day, where you could actually create, adornments to help you with that staging development. You can create containers for that stage, development, staging, production element concept in Tinderbox just fine. But yeah, Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that after a couple of years of playing around with this, I'm starting to get a better sense in my own mind for where DevonThink fits versus Tinderbox. I have always used DevonThink for a lot of collecting of things. And what I like about it is I can collect things as I go along. I have an email and suddenly I say, I need this email as a text document I can reference. I'll just save it into the inbox of DevonThink, and it's there, and I can file it wherever I want.
And if you don't come back to it for 6 months, well, it wasn't for use, Mark.
But more importantly, I find that I like DevonThink's ability to search things out. So although I can now do a lot of things in the Mac OS with Finder that used to be the purview of DevonThink, but now Apple's added them, I still prefer the DevonThink approach to it. But the other thing is I collect stuff. And so I'm increasingly thinking of DevonThink as the place to collect stuff as you go along. A URL, a PDF document, your own quick notes on a particular topic in a particular area. It's more activity-based, whereas I view Tinderbox as the tool for analysis. Once I have some stuff collected, using Tinderbox to go in and analyze that stuff, whatever it happens to be. And that's where it has unique capabilities that DevonThink doesn't have, and most other apps. There are very few examples of things that will do that as well as Tinderbox. So I think that's one way of separating the two views out, is that Tinderbox is the tool for parsing, analyzing, interpreting, evolving knowledge, whereas DevonThink is just a phenomenally good collection tool. I don't know whether that helps people.
As we've seen with Michael, who's focused on publishing, he wants to produce reports, documents. Mm-hmm. Is DevonThink weak, strong in that area? Because I'm certainly,
my personal opinion is that DevonThink is great for, again, collecting all the material.
Okay.
Which you then want to, if it's a referenceable item, you probably want to stick that reference into Zotero. And when you work in Tinderbox, you want to be able to link to that document. And if it was already in DevonThink, that would be the place to maybe link to it. But again, you're using Tinderbox for the analysis, interpretation, evolution of thought processes, as opposed to the I'm playing along, I find something that's interesting, I want to keep it,
Right.
which is where DevonThink stands.
The way I describe it is collecting the brain fart of the day. I just want a place to drop it, to get it out of my brain. And if it reappears, I can find it again without worrying about trying to organize it.
Great. That's what I do.
Yeah, and on that note, again, and I just so those that are listening, where Tinderbox and DevonThink really work well together is you can drag DevonThink file URLs over into Tinderbox, into a URL attribute. And then when you click on that attribute, it will open up that evidence file in DevonThink. So right. To Chuck's point, for me, Tinderbox, to your point, is my place of thinking, analysis, and then to David's point, publishing. And DevonThink is my evidence storage. It's the collection, right? So it's and then I've got my Zotero, which is my citation management. So between those three tools, I can cite my work, I can maintain my evidence locker, and then I can do my reporting and analysis. And to your other question, David, I'm going to say it emphatically, a statement which may or may not be true, but I'm going to say it with ChatGPT level conviction. So it could be total bullshit, but it's going to sound good. I don't think DevonThink does reporting at all. DevonThink can report in I've got these documents in me, but it's not necessarily going to help you write a report like Tinderbox will. It won't let you create contribution. It will let you create here's an index of my library, but it's not going to, and in that context, you could create some notes that have writing like elements in them, but you're not going to get a Tinderbox like report ever. And because it wasn't designed for that.
I mean, I just, the phrase would be different strokes for different folks. You look in a toolbox and you got several hammers, multiple wrenches, pliers, et cetera, et cetera. And I absolutely categorically do not think in terms of one tool. Mm-hmm. The pain in the ass of moving stuff from tool A to tool B, as much as that is a pain in the ass, it's also a major advantage because it forces you to clarify what you're thinking about.
Yes, but the point being is if you can facilitate automation and make linkages between the different tools is where it then becomes really powerful, right? I don't want to move my PDF file from DevonThink to Tinderbox, but I definitely want to link the two.
Well, I just encountered the term today, Fediverse, Fediverse. Anybody else heard of that one?
No.
Okay. Well, so I'm from the background. I used to be a computer programmer, and always the missing element is accurate documentation. And the only accurate documentation is the code itself. And in code, you can see what it's doing, but you do not know why it's doing what it's doing.
Yep.
So there was a genre long dead called a central data dictionary. IBM renamed that to metadata repository, and it's been basically a complete failure. And as our need for accurate documentation continues to explode at an accelerating pace, how do we wrap some degree of personal organization around this pile of crap we're trying to get our brains around?
Got it. And so looking up at our Google, a Fediverse is a network of interconnected servers which communicate with each other on a decentralized networking protocol. So
yeah, and Mastodon is what's been popularizing that lately.
Yeah. This is from, I picked this, found Fediverse on Tidbits.
Yeah.
And so it's I'll have to go back. I'm now on the right machine. I have to go back when I first Googled federated repository. The ability to keep all, and again, I'm thinking in terms of Fortune 350. Fortune 350 is the bottom end of my world. That's why I'm so impressed with the power of Tinderbox. But these big Fortune 350 firms, you name it, they got it, except for the documentation, which is the code, and which only the programmers know how to read, maybe.
Maybe.
End of political rant.
And that degenerates with time, that ability.
Again?
That ability to understand your own code or anybody's code.
Yeah, the future you. The future you. Who was the idiot that wrote this? Oh my God, that was me.
Yeah, I've had those moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Still do. Now, an interesting thing I've played with over the years is using Tinderbox as an augmented, if you will, for documenting stuff I've written. Source code in text is a terrible way to represent source code.
Yes.
Yeah, well, where's Peter Wasilko?
Yes.
And literate programming in Tinderbox. I also remember that in the Fortune 350, the programmer who no longer understands the code they wrote is now working for your competitor because you fired them last year.
Well, the issue here, I'm looking here, anybody here under 50 years old? Absolutely not. Anybody here under 60? Maybe. Okay, Fidelity. Okay, the kid. And the primary thing that's driving this is, as far as I can tell, I'm the old man here. I'm 75. And so our generation is leaving.
Yep.
With their knowledge. So the issue, and knowledge management, I've been rubbing elbows with that for longer than I care to admit, has been almost as much as a flop as the Central Data Dictionary. I mean, it's a converse of there's more need and there's poorer execution. And I see Tinderbox as a potentially effective, the universe of tools around Tinderbox as a potential solution in the small.
Well, two comments to your quote. Our generation is leaving with our knowledge. One, are you going to hop on the green comet? And two, it's what Isaac Asimov talked a lot about in his work. At some point, and Vonnegut did as well. At some point, those who built our technology are gone, and we no longer know how to maintain the floating, the elevator that lifts us without, and moves us around, and then society ends up breaking down. So
yeah. This is not a new issue of the book. I think of short story, The Machine Stops.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's a good one. I got to reread that. That's a great book.
Yep.
Machine Stops.
Yeah. Okay.
That sucks. Stops.
I'm a recovering academic, and occasionally will teach a class or do a talk. And one of the things I am impressed with is that we're really not, even though we have computer science degrees and hell, even software engineering degrees, we're really teaching people how to glue crap together. We're not teaching them how to solve problems, how to build stuff. In other words, my concern is the generation that's coming and will come after that and so on, they couldn't build the infrastructure to save their lives if they had to.
Well, that harkens to a quote that Steve gave us a few weeks back, where a lot of project and product management today is not actually inventing the product, but actually configuring the product we bought from somebody else. So a lot of Fortune 500 companies are, they have whole departments around configuring Salesforce to do what I wanted to do. You're not actually building the functionality of Salesforce, which to a certain extent is great. And but then you hit a certain point. I talked to a CTO at a major retailer the other day, and I said, "So what are you doing about privacy?" And I'm like, "I'm waiting for Salesforce to tell me." Because as the CTO of the company, he actually doesn't do anything. His entire job is just configuring the modules that Salesforce gives him.
And he's so customized Salesforce. I mean, the mindset is we're big and important and unique. So we're unique.
Yeah.
We don't like the way this tool works out of the box, so we're going to customize it.
Right.
Oh,
Steve,
Win has.
You're only unique in the pile of crap you end up with.
So
your pile of crap's different from my pile of crap.
Yep.
Well, since you called out my name, I would just say
pile of crap. Who?
I've written machine language code. I never want to do that again. And this is just sort of the the same thing. The organization I work for relies on Microsoft to maintain the platform. We would never be able to get the functionality and the power on our own to build it ourselves. So we give up some of that control and freedom because we get so much more value from the software that's delivered to us. So I don't know. I don't think it's a good example. I get the general point about the people who have built it are no longer to be active on the scene, and those that need to maintain it perhaps don't have the skills, but I don't think it's generalizable. I think we keep on going up to higher and higher levels of modularity in terms of our coding. And there's lots of good stuff that has been pre-built that we can do so much more. I wouldn't want to build a graphical user interface, for example.
Well, you are absolutely right. The infrastructure we have enables everything that we have now. Would you want to go back without it? No. My concern is being able to maintain it and to evolve it. Evolving the infrastructure has to happen at a level that this other stuff we have doesn't operate at.
Well, we just sort of enslave ourselves to Microsoft. And
well, some of us do. The others, we enslave ourselves to different gods, But right. Still, we're enslaved.
Everybody to a different king, sovereign.
Yep.
But let's bring it back to Tinderbox a little bit, and then we can move on to our other topics. What I do like about Tinderbox, though, is for me, at least in my small little world, to a certain extent, I get the best of both worlds in that worst case scenario, I can open up the hood and look at the XML file underneath, and there's my infrastructure. There's my core. You try to do that with a Word document and you're lost. And so I think there's a certain level of openness that the Tinderbox experience gives you that you don't necessarily have otherwise. Now, Wynn, you had your hand up earlier, so let's let you chime in and then we can move on.
Oh, I was going to pile on about knowledge in software and understanding from source code, and we should probably move back to Tinderbox topics.
No, you can pile on a little bit and let's move on. Your comments are always enlightening.
So I'll try to be sort of quick. One is, as I think I've mentioned before, part of my consulting work is on software involved in litigation, which involves being given a pile of source code and having to answer questions about what does this code do without being able to run the software, often with minimal documentation and maybe some screenshots that someone has managed to have. That is a really hard thing to do. I'd like to think that I've gotten kind of good at it, but it is very, very hard. I worked on a case where I literally got to spend weeks on the source code, some pretty intense weeks. And I am 90% sure that the owner of the source code, the company that was being sued in this case, did not understand what it did or how it worked. It was a discontinued product, so they didn't have people actively working on it. But they were going to be in serious trouble if the case had actually gone to trial, because their expert really had no idea about what the software did. They had a narrative about it that was just wrong. The other thing is that I'm teaching this class in computer security. And one of the things that has been interesting about it is, as most of you may know, a big problem in security situations has been buffer overflows in C and C++ programs and other things. But C tends to be the one that has this problem. And with computer science students today, it's not their fault. It is very hard to give them all the background that you actually need to understand how a buffer overflow attack works, because they don't see the machine at the necessary level of abstraction. And you just start pulling on that thread. And most of what kids these days, and it's not their fault, it's the way we're teaching it, but it's also the way that most software development happens, is we don't have the lower level conceptions. And my concern from this isn't that they're not learning to be good programmers for what they need to do. It's that we're getting to generations that don't understand the low levels, which matter for doing security, because that's where a whole lot of the problems are. And if it's only the bad guys who end up studying that, that's very bad. I'll stop.
Cool. Well, as we said in the preamble, sometimes this group can go on some pretty interesting tangents that aren't necessarily directly, but indirectly are related to Tinderbox. So that was fun. Thank you for that. So let's jump into our theme. Does anybody have any other projects they're working on that are of interest to them in using Tinderbox? And what are you playing with lately? Thoughts, ideas, comments? Otherwise, I can jump into some prepared comments I had for today. No one? All right, so let's jump right in. So on the forum, let me see if I can share my screen here. So last week we had on the forum, let me pull up the forum post. We had a community member. Okay, I lost you all. Okay, guys, can you still hear me? Give me a thumbs up or something like that. Just make sure I can. All right, good. All right. So on the forum last week, we had someone post this interesting a comment called zip links. It was actually it was Fidel, right? It's Fidel. That's your post. Good. Yeah. So Fidel posted. I just want to make sure it was this Fidel that's on our call today and this post. So Fidel posted this idea on zip links. And Fidel, actually, since you're with us, can you demonstrate what you meant here? Because I couldn't actually reproduce what you were seeing here in the when you said the zip link was floating. What did you? Oops, sir, what's the language you said? You can come off mute if you like. I can't hear you actually.
Sorry, my fault. I'm back. This is not. I understand this, and it's something only I can can deal with. So okay. No point in doing this in the meetup.
Got it. So Fidel pointed out an issue, but that led us to another discussion. In that what he was doing was he was copying tables into Tinderbox notes, if I understand the experience. And so the idea is you copy this table into a Tinderbox note, and then you're like, now what? And so let's give you an example of that. So let's go here, and let's say we start with a brand new Tinderbox file. And I've got some Julia Child cooking show stuff off to the side. So let's go here, and we'll call this a cast table. And we go like that. Whoops. Let me do it this way so I can get it right. So let's say you're out there on the internet and you find a table and you go like that. So this is, I don't have the exact table you used, Fidel, so I kind of had to make it up. But you effectively do this. So you find this HTML table out there on the internet and you're like, whoa, this is cool. And I want to capture that information and put it into my Tinderbox file. And so now the question is, what? Like, how do you actually use this information? How would you render it in a file? If you were to go to try to preview this, you end up with this long list. And you're like, okay, well, that's not a table. What's going on? And that all of that can get super confusing. And then you can go back here. And you're like, well, like, what do I do? And the reality is, and again, this is where maybe Mr. Bernstein, you can give me the proper language here. But my understanding is, I guess it's called RTF. Somewhere buried in here within the RTF layer, or whatever you want to call it, is the elements that are making up this table that's being viewed here. But those aren't necessarily being pulled out so that we could actually view it in export code. When we go view it in export code, what Tinderbox is getting is just the individual pieces of text. And so buried within that RTF layer is this kind of what might look like a table, but in terms of Tinderbox export code and the ability to actually preview that as an export, no dice. So then that raises the question, how do we parse this apart to start thinking about pulling all of this knowledge and these insights into a functioning Tinderbox document that we can start actioning against into what Chuck Wade talked about earlier, generating knowledge and interpreting and linking, and then ultimately, if you're going to go down to my route, actually producing a report, like publishing something to somebody, contributing that knowledge that you've you've now generated. So what I was thinking we could do is we could spend the rest of today's meetup parsing, this is let's start with hearing your strategies, and I can walk you through my strategy on how we might parse this apart. So let's start brainstorming a little bit. So as a group, what would your approaches be to start parsing this apart? Let's start with that. And again, I have my own answer, but I don't want to pollute your thinking with my own answer just yet. So, Mr. Steve.
Well, is it a foregone conclusion that we're going to paste it into a note? Or could we drag it?
Paste what into a note?
This table.
Well, we have.
But is that a necessary part of it? Could we simply drag it and use some of the capabilities of like dragging a Excel kind of thing and getting the attributes that way?
Okay, so that's a really good idea. So let's say we're pulling from the, that's a really great idea, actually. And that's why I asked the question, because I had not intended to demonstrate that, but let's go ahead and do it. So let's say, if I can reproduce the Excel file, actually, I'll do it this way. I've got the Excel file reproduced over here already. So let's say we've got this, right? So we have this material in a Excel file like this. So you're thinking that we could have this as a CSV file and pull that over into Tinderbox. Is that what you're thinking?
If that's an allowable part of the problem, if that's a constraint that we have to put it into a note, that's another thing. But if we sort of step back and say we can do a bit of preparation before we pull it into Tinderbox, then this might be one route.
Yeah, for sure. So again, and this also kind of ultimately, and since Fidel, this was your I kind of co-opted your project a little bit. So like your goal here, like what are you looking to achieve in the end of the day? What do you want to be doing with the information that's in this table? Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So it's the idea is to take an existing story and analyze it in terms of the different. So this is based on a screenwriting book that I'm reading, and according to this guy's theory, for your story to work, you need to have minimum 5, let's call them roles of characters, which are these ones here. You need to at least have your main character, your antagonist, who he calls an impact character, a guardian, temptation character, and then you can have either reason or faith or skeptic or sidekick. Anyway, that's his theory. So he says, if you analyze any really good story, you'll be able to find at least those 5 and maybe a few more. And if you're writing a story, make sure that you have at least those 5 and maybe a few more, but minimum baseline is have those 5 roles. Just to give you a background, I work as a screenwriter, so this is for my my screenwriting efforts. Anyway, so the idea is to so in the forum, I also posted a screenshot of a page from this guy's book where he said it's almost like a checkbox, like just make sure you've got these 5. Yeah, there we go. Make sure you've got those 5 cast members there, and then without that, your audience will not be satisfied. So make sure that's a minimum requirement. So what I wanted to do was little by little over time to build up a database of all the really great films I've watched or novels I've read, and analyze them in terms of having these main characters, impact characters, temptation characters, guardian, reason, etc., all these archetypes. And then over time, as I'm working on a new story, I can be able to think, hang on, this character sort of reminds me of the reason character in that other story. Okay, what do they have similar? And this other character in this story reminds me of that character in that other story. What similarities and differences do they have? So it's basically over time to sort of catalyze aha moments where I'm like, damn, this character is exactly like, Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, but they're different in this 1, 2, 3, 4. But they're very similar in terms of their archetype and role. So it's basically I think the term used in the Tinderbox, I don't know if it's a reference file or the book, it's emergent structure, to discover emergent structure. Yeah, so I guess it's to do that, especially, I mean, emergent structure with respect to stories. So discovering similar characters across stories. I mean, of course, they look different, they sound different, but they're playing the same role, and that really helps in the writing process.
So a bunch of stuff comes into mind when I think about that, and that's kind of where I was going with it, but I'm glad you put it in your own words. So, you know, essentially what you want to be able to do is essentially build a bunch of resources that you can draw upon later, right? And you've got characters, and those characters might be part of a movie or a part of a book or part of a story or some element. You have different archetypes, and presumably these archetypes mean something, like the word artist.
Yes,
has a definition, and it's got a history, and you want to possibly, for instance, know the history of artists too. And so just having the word artist buried into a table doesn't really help us, because we're not learning and we're not thinking. Likewise, I don't know what movie Frodo's with, right? Or I don't know what book Frodo's from when it's buried into a table, because there's no additional layers of layers that I could put on this. So to a certain extent, what you want to do, per Steve's comment, is we want to start with kind of getting this data out of the table and into their individual notes, because each one of these different elements are notes in of themselves that need to be explained and need to be understood within their own atomic context, and then they need to be related. We good with that?
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, if you don't mind, drop the citation for the book you're reading, and so we can kind of keep that history. So with that in mind, so let's start this out as our cast table, and let me move on. Is anybody else? Let's go with Steve's comment before. So I went ahead and I have that table now in an Excel spreadsheet, and so to that point, we've got role, name, archetype, all of that. Let's start with getting some of these notes, into a document. And so when you're pulling in a spreadsheet within Tinderbox, and it doesn't matter, actually, this is not a bad demo. So when you're pulling into a spreadsheet into Tinderbox, name is essentially equivalent to title. So what's going to happen is when I pull this spreadsheet into Tinderbox, Tinderbox is going to look for this idea called name, make that the name of the note. And so if we do this right, what I'm expecting to happen is I'm going to get a note called Frodo, and that's going to be the name. That data will be documented with to the attribute name, and then Tinderbox will see. Oh, wait a minute! In this first row, you also have role and archetype and arc, and so to that end, it's going to generate those attributes. It's going to generate an attribute role, an archetype role, and an arc role for us. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead because I understand a little bit about system level attributes in Tinderbox. So if I open up the document inspector real quick, and we go here, and I just know this because I know it. Tinderbox already has a system attribute. There's an attribute that comes with the system called role, which is a string. And so in the context of understanding the attributes, I don't really want to be pulling this data necessarily into that role as a string, because thinking ahead, a particular character, for example, could have multiple roles. They're not just the main character. And so we might want that to be a set. So I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this one to character role, right? And I'm also going to change this one to character archetype and character arc. So now what I'm going to do when I pull this spreadsheet in, Tinderbox is going to generate 3 new attributes for me: character role, character archetype, and character arc. And it's going to pull the relevant information into those elements. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to close this Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go over to where I saved it on my hard drive. Now I saved it as a .csv file. So when I pull that over into Tinderbox, Tinderbox will automatically parse that for me. And if we look in outline view, you'll now see that Tinderbox has created me a cast CSV, and there's Frodo, character role, character archetype, character arc. And so now essentially what I've done is I've developed a character note and have populated that character note with different elements. So if I go here, then you're going to see Frodo is a main character. Let's go here. Sorry. Where's your picture? Here. I've got your picture right here. So in the picture you shared with us, Frodo is a main character, and just so we can see it there in the file here. Frodo, come on. So Frodo is a main character. He's an artist, and his archetype is change. And similarly, we'll have gotten that same information for the other relevant notes. And some of these didn't have, like Faramir is down here and didn't have a architecture or arc. That's why they're different. And I must not have populated the wild card character information appropriately in the spreadsheet. So let's go look and see why that didn't come through. Where'd the spreadsheet go? Open that up. And we see, yeah, and you'll see here, Faramir and did not have wildcard in there. So that's why that data didn't come through. Right. Now, here's the other great thing about Tinderbox. So now that we know that that data is missing, we can come back here. We also know that, you know, Pippin's an emotional character. And so now I can resave this, hit save, go back to my file, redraw that back in. And now I've got Faramir as a wildcard character, doesn't have the other things populated. So when you have your data outside of Tinderbox, you can keep messing with it until you get it into the way you want it. That's one way to go about doing it. And then once you have it, you can start populating that data. So we've gotten certain types of this data into Tinderbox, and that worked out just fine. Now, one of the things that you talked about is you wanted to start developing this resources, you know, library. So let's go with that theme. And I talked about this before in the session last week, where I'm going to go ahead and create what I'm going to call a resources folder. And I'm going to drop this in here, and let's call this the characters folder. All right. So now in my resources, I've got a list of characters, and I've got a resources folder. Now, in the processes, we're going about doing this process. Now, again, the purposes of today's exercise, and we've got about another 42 minutes or so to achieve this, is for this exercise, what I want to do is I want to be able to use Tinderbox to reproduce this table. That's what we're going to be able to do at the end of this session. So we've got this idea of having this information here. Now we have these other roles and other information here as well. So for example, so we have a character arc. So what we might want to do, because I don't necessarily know what a character arc means, so I'm going to say character arc folder. And then we might have change and steadfast. Okay. So here, now because I've done this, I can actually then start talking about what the character arc of change means. So it's not just a matter of having the note change, but I can actually start educating myself. What does change mean? What does it mean to be a steadfast character? So then later I can go back and have that as a reference as well. What do I really mean when I say that character is has that nature, or is that has that kind of elements of it? The other thing here, you see we have various character archetypes as well in this document. So let's go here and we'll go character archetype. If I spell something wrong, please catch it for me. And if you're doing something like this, and let me show you a little trick too. There's a wonderful, there's many tools like this, but the one I use is a tool called TextSniper, which is pretty awesome. So if you use TextSniper, you'll see I use a hotkey to be able to turn TextSniper on, and I got this little target element here. So if I drag now TextSniper over this image, I want to grab those words, TextSniper is going to do an OCR against those images. And so now I can come in here and paste what TextSniper just grabbed out of that image for me. And then I can go ahead and explode that using the explode feature in Tinderbox. And so now I have notes for each of the different archetypes. So now, having done that, I can say, okay, now, and similarly, like we did up in there, lorem ipsum, what is an archetype character? What is a dictator character? I can start building this repository of other resources to help me understand all of these different elements as I'm doing my learning. Likewise, when you're going through that process, what you might want to do too, and let's go ahead and create a prototype. And for now, we'll start with a prototype we'll call P-Note. We can always change it later. And another thing I might want to do is create an attribute called citation key. And we'll make that a set. And did you, in the chat, I didn't see it yet. In the chat, did you put in the citation for your author?
Yep.
What's the guy's name? Cardwell?
Cardwell.
So as part of your research, what you might want to do is, I've been learned, so I'm going to assign the P-Note to these guys here. All right. And so now I've got the citation key. So what I've been learning here is, and let's say Cardwell, what was the year? Oh, do you have a year for this?
I think 29. Hang on.
20. Oh, you'll tell me.
2020. 2019.
So let's say, so I now know that what I'm learning about Cardwell is from 2019. And if I actually, in my text, I said, blah, 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 Cardwell, 2019, do that, right? I could actually write into my text like that. So as I'm doing my writing, as I'm doing my learning, I'm not just learning, but I'm also citing and providing evidence. One, if I'm doing a citation key up in this regard, I'm keeping track of where my research is coming from. And if I'm actually putting quotes into the work, I'm citing that actual piece of work. And these are, in another call, we can talk about citation management and all that, or you can, review any of our other videos that we've done. But what this allows you to do is you can start building this kind of series and a repository of different valuable information that you have in the system. So what other things might we want? So we've got a character folder, we've got a character archetype folder. Now we also want to have character roles. And so you have all these character roles there as well. Now what we can do here is, and there's a couple of things that we can do to play around with this. And I wouldn't necessarily do this otherwise, but I'm going to show you some tricks on how to pull values from different attributes and play roles here. So let's go ahead and see character roles. Actor roles folder. Okay. And by the way, too, I'm now getting to a point now where I'm getting enough notes where the notes are getting so bland that I actually want to start seeing some distinctions. What's the difference between a folder and what's a different note? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what I'll call a P-Note folder. And I'm now going to P-folder, I'll give it a little icon. And so since these are all folders, I'm going to go ahead and make them all folders. So now visually, I can start making a distinction between the notes. It just helps break up the eye a little bit when you're using badges, and it makes it a little easier to use Tinderbox in this context. Likewise, what you might want to do, and I'm going to pull over another prototype I created from a different file just to help with this process. Let's say you have, or what we can do here, let's say I've got this, I'll just do it this way. I've got this note called Frodo here, and I like these attributes that are displayed here with Frodo. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and drop Frodo down in here. And I'm going to call him P character. Actor. Give Frodo the P character the little person icon. And then I can go here and assign the person icon. Whoops, not folder icon. Assign the P character icon to these roles. Now, when doing that, what I might want to do too, if I want to, and here's a little trick I'll give you. Let's say I've got another attribute I want to create called type, just maybe down in the future, I want to be able to search on it. And I'll roll that up. And I'm going to say, clean those out because this is now. Okay. And let's say now I want to, you'll notice that type doesn't exist in this P character, in the characters attribute. Well, the reason why, and if I hit Command 1, we're learning a lot about Tinderbox right now. I can pop to the quick stamp and look at the attribute displayed attributes. And you'll notice that there's a concept in Tinderbox which is incredibly important. It's called inheritance. And what this means is when I associate a prototype with a note, that note will take on the attributes, the elements of that prototype, unless I've broken the inheritance. So because I dragged these notes in from a spreadsheet, these notes became their own independent, the displayed attributes became an independent element in, of any prototype. It means that the inheritance was severed. So if I want to go here, I can reset, say, Frodo. I can re-inherit that, and you'll notice that Frodo now is taking on the relationship. And now I can do that for multiple notes at once, reset them. And so now all of these notes have the relationship to the prototype. So later, if I go in here and I want to change the color to, let's say for the sake of argument, I want now these notes to be, the displayed attributes for these notes to be something, I don't know, let's put in like citation key. So we have it. All right, citation key. You'll now see citation key shows up on all of them. So that's a quick little demo on how to do, reconnect the prototype back to a particular note. So now as we're looking through these notes, I've got my character notes, I've got my people notes, I've got my role notes, and now I want to populate this roles folder. Now you'll notice in here, I've got a lot of values already in terms of roles, and I want to pull these out. And there's I would personally, I could either type those in myself, but since we want to do a quick demonstration of some coding or action code methodologies, what I might want to do here, by the way, is let's say I want to. So here's a quick, now again, I typically wouldn't do it this way, but I will for this purpose of this demo. I want to grab all of the values that are currently in these notes for their role, and so that I can move them and create unique notes about those. So as I'm brainstorming through this idea, one approach to go about doing that would be to create a stamp. And we're going to call this pull roles. Okay, and in this role, what I want to do is I want to say text equals the collection of the children and the character role values. So let's talk through before I apply the stamp. What I'm saying is make the text of the currently selected note equal to the collection of the children and the value of those children's character role attributes. So when I do that, there you go. I've now pulled out of all of those children notes all of those values. Okay, so now what I can do that I've done that, I can go ahead and copy this, paste this over in the roles folder, and now I can start playing around with this. I can either explode at the, and let's go ahead and do that. I can now explode at the delimiter semicolon. And now what I've miraculously and automatically done is created notes for every one of those elements. Now you see here, there are actually some duplicates there, and there's other ways that we could have handled that to remove those duplicates and all of that. But for the sake of time, we'll just manually delete those right now. And so now you'll see I've got my roles. And so that's kind of an exciting way to kind of go about creating your notes. And now that I've done that, and then again, you'll notice that there's other ways to do that, but I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to clean up. I want to remove the text that's in all of these notes. So I'll hit text and I'll reset those to the default value. So now the text of all these notes is clean. And so now I can go in here and define, let me move that out of the way. And I can actually now discuss, like what is a main character? What does a main character do? What's the purpose of a main character, right? So now as you're doing, and so this is a great thing. So as you're reading your book, you can start populating these things in here, and you can start taking notes about the role of a main character, and help infuse your learnings and knowledge around that process. And so this is, and so really what we've been doing this whole time is breaking out this. So let's just make sure we got everything. We've got all of the roles now as their individual notes that we can define. We've got all of these characters as their individual notes that, we can now discuss them and give their histories and their bios. We don't have, we have our archetypes already, and we have our arcs. So essentially what we've done in just the last few minutes is render all of the data within this spreadsheet into individual notes, which we now can individually define and refine and all of that. Now, so with me so far? Anybody else have any comments, thoughts, questions before we move on? Is this at all helpful yet, or shall I move on to the next step? And let's see, Mr. Bernstein, you had a comment here. It would be interesting next exercise to build this out as a framework and then pick up a copy of the empty framework and populate it for a story. Can you explain that, Mark?
Yeah, I'm just imagining that we could start with, for example, a populated archetype folder and roles folder, and those could all be pre-populated with the roles we're going to fill. And we take that as something that's been done, or maybe that has been done for us, and we pick it up in the forum. And then we pour Great Expectations, say, into this framework and analyze it in this structure. Is this sort of the task that you're thinking about?
Who, me?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Because it sparks a lot of epiphanies during the writing process of other stories to actually just realize, hey, the character I'm writing about is what's his name? Pip from Great Expectations, or whoever. He's exactly the same, So it really sparks epiphanies and aha moments. So yeah, that's the idea.
So let's think about this, and so let's go ahead and so we're gonna write the story Lord of the Rings. Because I happen to know that these characters come from Lord of the Rings, and because this happens to be let's just leave it. Won't call it folder right now. So let's say we have this thing called Lord of the Rings, and now what I want to actually do is analyze and create a table that's rendering the characters of Lord of the Rings. And that raises another interesting comment that I hadn't actually put in my demo. So we have another folder here called, we could have a folder called events folder. Another folder we could end up having here would be, I don't want to call it movie. Theme. I don't want to call it arts. I don't want to call it theme. Story folders. Okay. And so let's say, and one of those stories is called Lord of the Rings. Right. And another story could be, Great Expectations, right? So we've got, and so you can kind of see here what you're doing is you're creating, when you're, at least this is my view or how I've learned to think about these things. When I put something in the resource folder, when it's kind of standalone, and I think it's going to be, have an ability to relate to other things, and have that concept there. So just like I did the other, I showed you earlier, one method was to use this stamp to collect and pull notes from the children. I'm going to use the same strategy, but in a slightly different way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the stories folder, and I'm actually going to create a new user-generated attribute. And I'm going to call this one stories. And this is going to be a set. Okay. And then what we're going to do over here is in the rules, I'm going to go and say make stories equal to the name. Okay, and actually I'm going to change this so you can actually see the beauty of Tinderbox. So I'm going to change that, and because I rechanged the spelling of that name, I can go over here now and click stories and rechange it to story, because I don't like plurals for a reason we can explain later. And so now if I go here, essentially what I've told, what I've told Tinderbox here is like, populate the story attribute of this note with the names of its children. Okay, well, why did I do that? Well, part of the reason why I'm doing that is I'm creating a drop-down list for me that I can then later reuse to help me repurpose my content, but also not make typos. So since we were playing with the prototype, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to actually say, add this story here. There. Okay, and then you can see here, so now story is an attribute that's that visible of all of these notes. And so I can now, because I made, and what's interesting about Tinderbox is every attribute has the potential to access every value associated with that attribute anywhere in the file. So because down here, I was pre-populating the attribute story with the children of these notes. When I go up to Aragon now, you'll see that those stories are now selectable, right, as kind of a drop-down box, whereas previously they were not. So now I can go ahead and say, you know, Aragon is now part of the story Lord of the Rings. And then what I could do too is I could go here, select them all at once, click story, and say Lord of the Rings. Spell it properly and apply that. And by selecting them all and using the quick stamp inspector, you'll now see that I have made every one of these characters part of the movie of Lord of the Rings. Right now, and and later you might find a short story that has the character Frodo, and he's also part of another, same character coming out of Lord of the Rings, but he's been put into somebody else's short story. So you might want to make that association, because that could be something that's interesting to you. So now you see we know a lot more about these characters and what we're doing. And now we're going to go up here and let's go ahead and create an agent now. Because what I now want to, and this is one of the fun ways and uses of agents. And we're going to say cast of characters. I'm going to label this agent called cast of characters. And when I click away, I'm going to tell Tinderbox that says, go get me the go get me the prototype equals. So go get me all of the characters, all of the notes whose P prototype equals a P character. And so what's going to happen there? I now have all of the characters for that movie. Now let's give another character, and let's call this one Fidel. And actually, while we're at it, let me show you another trick when we're doing something like this. Call this one Fidel. So I've got another character called Fidel, but you notice Fidel didn't take on the prototype of characters. So I'm going to go back down to my folder. This is just something I've done for convenience, and I'm going to display the on-add functionality. And up here, I can now say prototype equals P character. Character. Okay, so now if I were to add a new one there, you'll see that Fidel now gets the prototype automatically, and he is now part of the. Okay, and I can either type it here if I want. The Tinderbox story. Now, and you'll notice that now that is, that is now part of the repertoire there. And I have other action code we can share later that would actually automatically create a note down here as well that we could later define as the Tinderbox story, but we're not going to go through that right now. So let's just go ahead and do that manually for now. Come on. Okay, so with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now the reason why I went ahead and created this agent is I actually want to render, oh, actually, before we do that too. So now we have to ask ourselves, why do I want a table? Okay, so there's a lot of ways to get tables in Tinderbox or table-like functionality. So one way to get a table in Tinderbox from an analysis perspective is I could go to View, say Use Columns, and I could say, let me look at the story, right? So let's say story. All right, and let's also say the character arc, right? So maybe if I'm just doing some quick analysis, I can go down and say, okay, I'm analyzing these notes, and I can see that, you know, in the in this character list, I've got you know, the story Tinderbox. These guys, all these are from Lord of the Rings, and they're steadfast, all of that. Okay, and you'll notice because we ran the agent, and the prototype was for anybody that has the character prototype, Fidel shows up here too in the agent, right? And that's not what we want for this particular analysis, because for this particular analysis, I'm going to tab this in. We want the characters for the movie Lord of the Rings. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Change. Let's go ahead. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and change this attribute. Now, there's a couple ways you can go about changing the action that this agent's running on. You can open up the inspector, go here and click on the agent or query, and I could say, and we're going to say, and story dot as string that I contains Lord of the Rings, right? So by doing that, it's now going to rerun, and you notice it's not going to work because I got $2 there. So do a little ampersand, and now we're going to run it and rerun my agent.
Michael, it went back to $, because you didn't.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
sorry. And there we go. Now we'll rerun the agent. And so now we only get the characters that are from Lord of the Rings. So now you've got this wonderful repository of characters from everybody you've been analyzing, and you can now run agents to pull them in as you see fit. Now, you can see we've done a table in this way. Now, there's another way to do a table. Let's right mouse click on this note, and we'll say, I'm going to open this note up into a new tab. And now in this new tab, I want to view this new tab in the attribute browser. And now here, I can see here's the stories and the character arc. And maybe I want to actually grab all of the elements of that. Go up here, like that, paste those in. And so now I can also analyze it this way, right? So now I can start using the attribute browser to be getting table-like functionality to be doing my analysis. And maybe what we want to do is we want to say character arc as a summary. And I actually then also want to summarize on character arc. And so now, and I want to count. So now I can see, okay, there's 8 steadfast characters, and there's 4 change characters, and there's 1 that I don't actually have analysis. So if Tinderbox in this point is a thinking tool, I'm now going to use the attribute browser as a table to think. I can use the column view as a table to think. And there's a number of different ways that you can go about doing that. Now, with me so far? Any comments, questions, thoughts, ideas from anybody? So far what we've demonstrated is we've been able to render that table that you pasted into that one note, broken into a bunch of different notes. And let's see actually how many notes do we have so far. Loosely, we're now up to 75 notes when we had 1 before. You know, and we're now starting to build that repository of knowledge and insight, you know, our personal suite of information that we can be able to leverage and interact with. So before I move on to the next stage, are there any other comments? Because we're covering a ton here. Comments, thoughts, questions before I move on to the next stage?
No, the only thing I would point out, but I may be getting ahead of you on this, but that there's lots of room to use the tagger to automatically suck attribute values from your text and then apply them. So say you're doing a synopsis of one of the stories, you can actually use that, the tagger, to pull the names of your characters off the synopsis and then populate the attribute field.
Yeah, you could do that. That's other strategies for analysis. And remember, tagger though, what you could do, and let's say if you were doing that, what he's referring to is you're in here in your Frodo, and let's say somewhere in here in the definition of Frodo, you said that Frodo is a steadfast character, right? So you have the word steadfast in the description of Frodo. So just to talk about that, and again, because we're in Tinderbox, every view is looking at every note. So if I go back here, just because I edited Frodo in the attribute browser, when I go back to the outline view, Frodo gets that change as well. So you see here, I went in here and I defined Frodo as steadfast. So what Art is referring to, and we'll just take a little bit of a segue, is this idea called taggers. Now, to get the taggers up and running, what you're going to do is you're going to go and add the hints folder. And in the hints folder, this thing's called taggers. And let's go ahead and create a natural language character arc attribute. And because I created that note here, I have to go and create an attribute here, and we're going to call that set. Okay. And for me, I would create a natural, what I'm going to call natural language character arc attribute in addition to my character arc attribute, because I might want to refine those a little bit later. And so let's go ahead here and we'll say, what's the quality of a character being steadfast? Actually, let's change this a little bit. Fidel, what would it mean for a character to be steadfast?
It means they don't change their worldview or their beliefs by the end of the story. How they begin is how they end in terms of their worldview, their flaws, etc. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm brainstorming here. So let's say don't change. So let's say in your description of Frodo, you've got this terminology in the language you've used the word, does not change. Right. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that term not change, and I'm going to say steadfast, not change. So because I did that, and sometimes you have to, let me save this file before we move on. I'll save it later. All right. Because sometimes you need to close the file and reopen it to get the taggers going. So I'll just do that right now. And because I did that, what Tinderbox is going to do is it's going to go through all the text of the notes. Oh, and I didn't save it when I did that. Steadfast. Change. Actually, did I put it in a different note? Oh, yeah. See, I put it in the organizational note. So I actually did write it down. I just put it in the wrong note. Right. And then it is also case sensitive. So if you do it either way, so I do it like that. So what Tinderbox is going to be doing with the natural language right now is it's going to be going through the notes and looking for this term not change. And if it sees that language, it's going to say, that means steadfast. So I'm going to populate the natural language character arc attribute with the word steadfast. And so now if we go back up to, if we go down to our prototypes and add that new natural language character arc prototype we created. And the reason why it's grayed out here is because Tinderbox has now reserved it for the tagger functionality. And I go up here and I probably, because I changed it's an action that happens in the background. So let me redo it to force it to move faster. And you'll see now here, Frodo, because the text says not change, Frodo has automatically been tagged as steadfast. So as you do your research as well, you can use the taggers to help you populate those values. But in the context of what I'm doing here, I didn't want to lose control of my own manual use of character architecture or archetype or character arc. So I've actually created 2. And so then later I can be aligning or associating those how I might see fit. So that's a little bit of a tangent. Let's go back to what we were in the last 9 minutes of what we are really trying to achieve for today, though. So I've now got an attribute, an action here. By the way, too, just as a side note, how do you distinguish a note as an agent versus a note? If you look here, notes have this little dark line above the top. On the top, that means they're a note. If that little dark line's on the bottom, that means they're an agent. I personally can't see that well. So what I do is I say P agent. And I give it this little heartbeat icon because it's been so for me, that little agent, that little heartbeat means Tinderbox is out there working for me. And then the other reason why I do that too is I say agents. And I add the agent query, whoops. And I say agents, and I add the agent priority, and I add the agent action. So personally, I find this to be helpful, and I apply it to all of my agents. So that way, I can actually modify them really quickly if I want to, and I don't have to update the inspector, and I can actually manage that. And if you ever want to turn an agent off, you just hit -1, and then that turns the agent off. And then if you turn agent 1, turn it back on. So now the agent's running. Okay, so now in our last 8 minutes, let me show you how to actually render this as a table. So if I go ahead now and I've got cast of characters hit, and I hit preview, and nothing happens. You're like, oh my God, what happened? Well, the reason why nothing happened is right now, Tinderbox is using the template preview to do this. The out of the box template of preview only displays the text of a note. So I don't want to mess with preview, and I've got other videos we've discussed about that. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to add in the HTML template. So you can see I've gone to File and added the HTML template. And now I'm going to hit Command 1. And I'm now going to say, I want you to be displayed with the HTML template. Now, when I do that, you'll see, okay, so we've got our cast of characters. We've got all of our characters, and and if we want to actually sort our characters by name, we can go to sort by name. And so that my agent will sort those characters by name. And as soon as it refreshes, and now I've got my cast of characters organized by name, but we still don't have, and it looks like I've got Saruman twice, which is fine. So I can now go down in here, cast of characters, and delete one of my Sarumans. So I don't need 2. Okay. So, but we still don't have a table. So how do we get a table that we actually want to preview and render within a particular note? And that's when we convert to HTML. So if I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here. And I'm going to create a note called tcast. Okay. And then I'm going to also create a child note to this. It doesn't have to be a child note, but it's convenient enough to do it. Tcast item. Now, in the past, we've talked about naming conventions. So you notice how I said P character. That for me, that means prototype character. And here I'm saying tcast. That means template cast and template cast item. And if you go to WC3 Schools, there's 2 ways to do this. You either learn HTML yourself, or you ask someone on the forum like me, and we do it for you. But if you go to WC3 Schools and you say HTML table, spell it properly. Come on. The other way I often do this, just do this, W3C Schools. Come on. Table, come on. Right? This gives you the training on how to build a table in HTML. It's a absolutely fantastic resource. Or as someone said, you could also just go to ChatGPT and say, how do I build a table in HTML? So let's go ahead though and build this out really quick. So let's say from Tinderbox export code parlance, we want this to be, we want the title of the note to display the title. We want the text of the note to display. And when you're building a table, let's go ahead and put in our code. So we're going to say table order equals 1. You can also do this with div tags and all that, but this is going to be an easy one. And what I tend to do when I'm writing HTML is I write the open block and the closing at the same time. So what this is saying is, hey, Tinderbox, or hey, browser, or preview, or whoever you're talking to, I want you to open a table and I want you to close a table. And then you think about, okay, well, what do I need in a table? Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to open a row and I need to close a row. Okay. And so the row is going to, that first row is going to be the column that's the headers for the table. And then what I need to do if I go back here and I have to remind myself, all right, we've got 4 columns: row, name, archetype, arc. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say, all right, so what that means is I need 4 table tags. Right. So I now know I need 4 table tags. So I'll just go ahead and do that 4 times. And I'm going to say the first one's going to be name. And then the next one's going to be role. And then the next one's going to be archetype. And then we're going to have arc. All right. So this is going to give us the table. So when I'm rendering it, a table, let's go ahead and look at this. And now what I'm going to say is I don't want to be using the HTML table. I now want to be using my cast template to review this. So when I review it, you'll see, okay, that's the first row. I've got my name of the character, and then the row, the archetype, and the arc of the characters. So we've asked Tinderbox, for having selected this, to give me that first level. But now what do we do? Now what we want to do is we want to say, hey, Tinderbox, what I want you to actually do with this template is I now want you to, before you close the table, I want you to add additional rows to this table. And the additional rows I want you to add to the table are going to be from the children. So I'm going to say, hey, Tinderbox, go process the children, and process the children with this template. We're going to call it cast item. And so now if I go to the template called cast item, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to say, now for each of the children, Tinderbox, I want you to create a row. Okay. And just like we did before, I want 4 columns. Okay. So let's go ahead and here. All right. Go like this. So I've got my 4 columns. So now if I do that, you'll see here, okay, I've got my casted characters, I've got the title, and I've got now rows for every single one of those characters. So now what we're going to do here is I now need to tell Tinderbox what values do I want to have in each of those characters. And that's using the export code. So I say value $name. And then I can say I want, and I'm just going to make it easier for myself like this. And I want value character arc. And I want value character archetype and value character role. So now when I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, now when you build this table, go pull the value of name, character, role, archetype, and stick it in the document. And now we do that. So now I'm getting my table. And then you'll notice here, some of them actually, let's say, sorry, let me go back here to your original table. I want to show you one quick thing, and we're almost done. If I go back to your original document here, we didn't do it at this table. You see that Saruman actually plays 2 roles. He's got a wild card role as well as a guardian role. So if I go back to Saruman, he's not just a guardian. He is also, I can either type it in or just select, click it. Or, oh, and you know what? the reason why that didn't happen is we go here in our role, character role. Right now we've got it set as a string. So we can go ahead and say, you know what, characters can actually have more than one role. So by setting it as set, we can actually say, well, Saruman's now actually a guardian and a wildcard role. So now if I go do this, you'll see that Saruman has got the role of guardian and wildcard, but I don't like the semicolon there. So from a view perspective, what I want to do now is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say, using action code dot replace with a comma instead. So now I go like that. Whoops. I got a typo here. Dot replace. There you go. And now you'll see, rather than a semicolon, I've got a comma. So now we've built out another nice table. And that could be part of your report. Now we're 1 minute over. So let me pull out the little, my Julia Child cooking show. And there's a much more complex way of going about doing the other type of table. So here is some previewing I did before. And so I just, what we just did is reproduce that table, basically, what we showed here. Now, let's say you wanted to actually re-render that kind of, this kind of table where you're actually starting with role rather than name. And you're wanting to have things a little bit more organized. You can do that. And it's a slightly more complex template to write. But when you do that, you can also get something like that, where you actually see the role, the name, and then you can say, here's all of the characters that meet the wildcard role and what their archetype is and what their arc is. So what this allows you to do, and hopefully what we're getting out of the lesson that we've done here, is once you've broken up all of your concepts into their atomic elements, once you've got all of the variables spread throughout Tinderbox into all of its various attributes, and then you can actually apply what we call metacognition, which is you now can go ahead and in this context like here, as I'm having Tinderbox parse the data in a slightly different way, using a different approach to be able to render that table, but yet you get the output that you want. So there you go. That's kind of a master class in Tinderbox template development. And we went through a lot of the different examples of, using replace to remove the semicolons. We talked about HTML, we talked about templates. We did a lot with creating a resource directory. And as I was going through this, I don't know anything about storytelling, but as I was doing my initial analysis with this, I got in the main character roles. Then I started thinking about the story arcs, but then I actually realized, well, there are a lot of different types of story archetypes. And what I learned in the process of doing this, well, Kurt Vonnegut has his top 6 and Christopher Booker has his top, and when we look at archetype folders, there's actually a ton of character archetypes, a lot more than just the hero and artist. And in fact, you actually enneagram archetypes as well, such as achiever and all this. So you can actually start seeing this broader list. And now, hopefully this is demonstrating you just in an hour or so of my research preparing for today's call, you can now start seeing the different insights that you can get in terms of, show me these, show me the sources of these types of character archetypes. Well, they're enneagrams. This one's from Vonnegut, that one's from Booker, this one's cited to this person. And you can start really not just creating your stories, but actually maintaining and generating an evidence track of where you got those insights. And for me, and I'll conclude on this one point, this is what I teach my students. For me, because of the new introduction of ChatGPT and the artificial intelligence and work and all of that, I believe those that will actually be able to cite and provide evidence to where their ideas came from will be the differentiator from those that are just doing work. And in the future, knowledge workers like us are going to get hired, not just because we can provide the ideas, but actually either we can provide evidence to our own ideas, or we can take ideas that are presented to us and then be able to then go in and render those for ideas and be able to say, no, this is correct and that's not correct. And having Tinderbox as a tool to be able to help us with that level of thinking is really powerful. So that's what I have for you today, guys. Thoughts, ideas, comments? Did you enjoy that? Good?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and let
Very
you all
useful.
know. I'm sorry?
Very useful. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that and appreciate it. I learned a lot. Yeah.
Oh, and then one last thing before we go. Thank you. And I just want to show you this. Once, because David Eddy opened up the show about this. For me, yes, all of this knowledge, thinking, interpretation, all of that's incredibly valuable. But now let's say you want to go, you're working with a client, and now you actually want to provide them that Word file report that they've been asking you for, right? Because mental masturbation is great, but at the end of the day, if you don't have documentation, you can't help, right? So, right, that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. So by using these agents and this templating approach, watch what happens here. And this is the last thing that I want to kind of point out. I actually created this other file, this other template here too. And you notice this trick here. I'm saying, if your type is report by character, use this template. If your type is report by role, then use this template. And so then when I actually go to this note, not the individual notes, Tinderbox then actually reports them both. And so now,
Michael, are you telling us that there's two different versions of reality?
I am. There are multiple, whatever version you want it to be. And again, that's the beautiful thing about Tinderbox is you can actually make your own reality, however you want it to be with whatever words you want. And to what we were talked about last week, some of these words, artists, there could be 25 definitions of the term artist. Well, you can now go in here and go to roles, archetypes, sorry, where are they? No, character archetypes. And you could say, okay, well, this is artist. Then you could say, well, okay. Here is artist 1. Here is artist 2. You can, again, this method lets you really let your knowledge expand unlimitedly. And then you can use Tinderbox to then filter your reporting however you want it to show up.
I'm going to redact my response, Michael.
What do you mean? What's that?
Hopefully somebody. So I grew up on that. I started looking at life during the McCarthy era. So hopefully folks have taken some time out. The last week's House hearings for the bottom of the pile of oversight. Absolutely spectacular theater of the absurd of I'm only going to look at reality my way. And so this accurate documentation, the ability to produce accurate documentation is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So that's
and then to watch you consistently beating on the same week after week after week after week. I mean, this is not easy. I mean, how many thousands of hours do you have in the pilot's chair?
A lot.
Tinderbox?
I don't want to actually admit it to myself.
Yeah, that'd be embarrassing.
Yeah, actually, I heard a story the other day though, and again, I'm not equating myself to this, but they actually said, every Buddhist training since the Buddha's first enlightenment, when he sat down under the Bodhi tree and then came out and gave his training of 4 Noble Truths, every single Buddhist training since then is all about that first lesson. And so if you think about it to the point that you just said, every week we hammer on different things, but it's all about the same lesson.
From a different,
collecting knowledge, creating knowledge, collaborating, contributing knowledge. It's all the same lesson. It's the context that changes. It's maybe the method that's slightly different, but the end goal, the end purpose, it's all the same.
And that's very, very hard for people because we spend so much time of our lives looking at, well, I want to master the reality in front of me, but then you rotate it just a little bit, and that view of reality just falls apart.
Yeah.
It's particularly if Fidel is wrestling with screenwriting and the subtleties of weaving Greek mythology into his characters, which is, you got to do it. There's nothing new.
But there's nothing new, but yet there is. Like when you always hear like there's 16 archetypes of characters, but when you start digging down to it, that's not really true. I mean, it's that there's hundreds. It's all context. It's all nuance. And again, Tinderbox is a tool that can help you tease apart those nuances to create something unique and special.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate your attention. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Let me know if I can improve in any way. But hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, Art, you were coming off mute.
A great demo. No, great demo. Thank you.
Did you have a good time, Michael?
I love it. This. I'm a teacher at heart. This is what I really enjoy this stuff. So this is good. All right, everybody. Talk to you later. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, one question, Michael.
Yeah.
Before you go, don't forget to save the chat because I joined in early. I won't have the early bits of the chat.
Yeah, no, I got it.
Marquez is not there. Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye.